All right, so I'm live at the Red House with Andy Tennille, and this is Tyler Neal. And Andy, thanks for coming to hang out with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Andy, you are a co-owner of the Ram Cat in Winston-Salem, pretty much the only place in my town that I currently play at now.
We're lucky.
Yeah. How did you end up in this position?
It's been like a weird long journey. I mean, I showed up in Winston in 1996. Took my first job in the music business the second day I was in Winston. Walked to Ziggy's, and I was a freshman at Wake Forest, and asked Jay Stevens for a job, and he asked me to put up a bunch of flyers. I didn't drive. I didn't have a car, and so he handed me a huge stack of flyers, and I walked back down University Parkway with this big stack of flyers that he instructed me to put up all over Wake Forest campus. And, the next day walked back out to Ziggy's and told him I put up all the flyers, and he was like, "No, you didn't." And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And there was a person sitting there in the office, and he said, "Go get in your car and drive to campus and see if this guy's put up the flyers." And the person came back 20, 30 minutes later, and they're like, "Yeah, the flyers are up everywhere." And he turned to me and was like, "You're hired." And that was my first start in the music business. And Jay kind of served as a mentor for me. I hung flyers, eventually started bar backing, bartending, booking a few shows at Ziggy's, and then moved to California. At that point in time, I was writing for some music magazines, taking pictures for music magazines, ultimately started working with some bands, and then moved back to Winston and was touring a lot with a lot of various bands. And then I guess kind of when Ziggy's closed, the guys who owned the building started asking around to see if anyone was interested in reopening a music venue there. And myself and Richard Emmett had been friends for a long time, Richard being the former owner of The Garage, and has been promoting and producing live music in Winston-Salem for, probably earlier than when I showed up in 1996, certainly. And we just kind of started to talk about it, and talking with the landlords and talking with people who might be interested in investing with us. And ultimately got to a point in kind of mid to late 2017 where we thought we were going to make a run at it. Coincidentally, about that same time, both of the primary the artists that I primarily worked with in terms of touring on the photography side, one passed away, the other one, our relationship kind of ended, and I had found myself with a bunch of time on my hands. And so I came back to town in October and looked at Richard and said, "I think let's go make a run at this thing, and let's see if we can make it happen." And we put together a group of investors and went back to the landlords and said, "We want to try it." And they said, "We'd love to have you do it if you really want to do it." And so put everything together and opened our doors on March 9th of 2018.
What drew you to Ziggy's in the first place? What made you, have you just always been into music?
Always loved music. My folks were big music fans. Dad and Mom had a big record collection. Spent a lot of time as a young kid flipping open the records and looking at all the photos. A lot of Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Sam and Dave, a lot of the Stax stuff, Allman Brothers Band, the Grateful Dead. But really kind of a wide swath of music that was kind of constantly playing in the background when I grew up. And so I'd heard about Ziggy's before I showed up in Winston. I just read about concerts that had been there, bands that had played there, in various music magazines. And so I was pretty well aware of it when I showed up, and I knew some folks who lived in Winston who told me, "Oh yeah, it's a great place. You need to go and check it out." And what a great, I often tell people that, I went to college at Wake Forest, but I learned probably more at Ziggy's, and some, had some really lasting relationships evolve out of that time that I spent working there. A lot of the folks that work at the Ram Cat are folks who I met working at Ziggy's and who I've known for 25 years. So it was a really cool place to kind of cut your teeth and watch how a business like that is run. Jay, obviously, an amazing promoter, been in business and put on a lot of great shows over many, many years. And there were great shows coming through at that point in time. I mean, at that point in North Carolina, you either played the Cat's Cradle or you played Ziggy's. There really wasn't. I mean, Amos's South End was down in Charlotte, but you really were, if you were going from the 930 Club in D.C. and you were going to Atlanta, you were either playing one of those two rooms on your way down I-85, essentially. And so we saw a ton of great shows through there at that point in time in the late 90s and early 2000s, just some incredible music. I mean, I look back at those calendars, and I'm blown away at the talent they had in.
Yeah, I always hear about it. Of course, I was actually I just kind of missed it all. I guess I know some guys who were just barely older than me who got to experience some of that. But, it was just a little before my time and well before I was ever playing music downtown.
Yeah.
What was your role at Ziggy's?
Yeah, so I started out hanging flyers, and then ultimately a friend of mine who was at Wake was a bar back, and he got college night, which was Tuesday nights, which was also mug night. So you could bring any size receptacle to the bar, and we would fill it up for $1. And so I became his bar back on college night, mug night, and then when he graduated, I took mug night. And was then the bartender for that night. And then I started bar backing across all the nights. And then eventually started bartending across all the nights. And so it was primarily up in the liquor room at Ziggy's and that portion of the club. All the older bartenders were really smarter than I was at that point in time. And they were like, the bar, or the beer bar outside, the little small bar, was an easy gig. You just sat there and cracked beers and handed them to people. Right. Upstairs, you had to learn how to make drinks, and none of them wanted to really do that. They just wanted to crack beers and do the volume game, whereas I was up there, and you had to pay a membership fee to get up there, if you recall. And so it was like, it was fine. I loved it. I mean, I have great memories from the place, but in hindsight, I should have figured out that the reason I at the time thought, oh yeah, I'm the liquor bartender. This is great, but now looking back on it with some experience in hindsight, I was like, oh, they liked that gig because it was really quick and easy to, serve a bunch of customers and thus build a lot of tips, and fewer people were coming up to the liquor bar.
Yeah, you got to learn.
Yeah. I was young. I was 19 when I started there.
Yeah.
So
from the bar experience in music to then getting into photography, which I've seen and heard a little bit about, but don't really know what that experience was like for you. I didn't know for a long time that you were I guess a professional photographer, right?
Yeah, I guess. I started writing for magazines when I was still at Wake, really with the local arts and entertainment weeklies, ESP, Triad, Monthly. There's like 2 or 3 in addition to Relish, or whatever Relish's predecessor was. And so I started writing for the Old Gold and Black at Wake Forest, their student newspaper, got a few clips, then went to the weeklies and got an opportunity to start writing for them. And then eventually started writing for music magazines, Paste, Relics, Harp, and started getting opportunities while I was still in college. And I was like, well, this is kind of what I would love to do. Always thought I was going to be a journalist, and had written little newspapers as a kid for our neighborhood and passed them out and stuff. And ultimately started, and I always had a love for photography. My dad had cameras around when I was little. He got me a Minolta when I was probably 12, and so I started playing around with that a little bit, and was always looking at music magazines as a kid before I got to college and seeing Jim Marshall's photos, or Jay Blakesberg's photos, or Baron Woolman's photos, the first official photographer for Rolling Stone magazine, and just was drawn to these images. I thought they were really cool, and ultimately started writing for some magazines and some newspapers, and then figured out as I was getting these freelance gigs that I was getting paid for the words, and then somebody else was getting paid to take the pictures when it was necessary. And so I just kind of went to the editors and said, hey, I've got a camera. Can I take the pictures too? And they said, yeah, and we'll pay you for them. And I was like, oh, okay. So I can get paid for the words and the photos. And my last semester at Wake, I'd done everything for my journalism degree and my history degree. I was a double major, and I'd taken like bowling and tennis like 3 or 4 times just because I needed credits to graduate, and I had started to get these gigs at magazines and newspapers, and so I went to I think my last semester I enrolled for like every photography class that they offered: introductory, intermediate, advanced, portraiture, lighting, everything. And the teacher, who's still there, his name's John Pickle, called me and said, "You can't do all of these classes at once." And I said, "Well, here's the deal. I'm getting paid to do this, as a student. I've got these gigs. If you can teach me a little bit more about this stuff, it'll be a skill set I can walk out of this school with and get paid with day one."
Right.
And he seemed to get that and was like, "I get it. Cool." And so he signed off on letting me take, I don't know if it was an independent study or if it was like I got to take multiple classes at once, but essentially I spent the entire last semester I was at Wake Forest in the darkroom and learning lighting and different lighting techniques and just taking a lot of pictures. And he's a super great guy. He's still there, and that kind of gave me some skills to then, when I graduated, I took a job at the High Point Enterprise in High Point, North Carolina, as a general assignment reporter, covering pretty much everything. I went from general assignment to cops and courts to Greensboro, covering the city council, and then ultimately covering High Point City Hall. And at the same time, that was kind of my day job. I was still freelancing for magazines on the music side of things for a long time. And then ultimately, that was when the newspaper business was kind of dying in a lot of ways. The internet had happened. All the newspapers rushed to put all their content mistakenly on the internet for free. And then everyone said, well, if I can get this for free online, then why would I get a subscription?
Right. You
see where it's leading. Everything kind of collapses. And I was kind of heartbroken. I mean, I loved the job. I loved the daily newspaper gig. It was a lot of fun just because you had to, every day was new. I'd come in, I'd figure out what I was going to write about that day. And then you had to become kind of an expert within a couple of hours to then, cogently write about something for the newspaper the next day. And that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
You learned a lot about it. And ultimately, the newspaper thing, I saw it kind of declining. I'd been in Winston or in this region for 6 years. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to move. I'm going to get out of here for a little while. I was dating my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She was born and raised in Winston, went to Wake Forest, had never left this area. And so I was like, hey, let's get out of here and go do something different, see a different part of the country. And so I ended up driving across the country and stopping in various places, trying to figure out if I wanted to live there or not, and ultimately ended up in San Francisco in the Presidio because a bunch of my friends from Wake Forest, or 2 of my friends from Wake Forest, had moved there, one of which was a public school teacher, and they'd opened the Presidio after the Navy left to public school teachers to take the housing. It was like really affordable housing in San Francisco. And so I ended up ultimately moving out there and living in an officer's house in the Presidio and really starting to focus on the music side of things. Got a bunch of temp jobs to kind of pay the bills, but was out most every single night somewhere in the Bay Area seeing music and really photographing a lot of music. Met Jim Marshall the first night that I was in town. We were at a Tony Joe White concert at Café du Nord, which is a really famous venue in San Francisco. And it was one of those weird events where I moved to town, kind of like when I moved to town and met Jay Stevens. Moved to town, kind of dumped my boxes in this room in the Presidio, and went out to go see Tony Joe White and brought my camera. A friend of mine was then managing or working with Tony Joe, and so they got me a photo pass, and I was just standing there at the lip of the stage before the show started, and this curmudgeon-y old man showed up in a blazer, and he had a bunch of Leicas around his neck, and I was like, who is that? And I kind of thought it was Jim Marshall, and he started talking to me and asking who I was, and I said, it's my first day in San Francisco, and he kind of thought that was really funny, and he thought it was funny that this kid who was 20-something years old, wanted to come see Tony Joe White on his first day in San Francisco. And so we talked for a while and then shot the show. and I only got to shoot the first 3 songs because I was, a nobody photographer, didn't really know anyone. Jim shot the entire show. And after the show, I got up, and Jim came over to talk to me and handed me his business card and said, "Hey, stay in touch. You don't know anyone in town, right?" I said, "No, I don't know anyone." And ultimately got me invited to come backstage and meet Tony Joe White, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And stayed in touch with Jim all the way until his death. I mean, he's a huge hero of mine and inspiration, and it was just so strange that my first day in San Francisco, I met him just completely by coincidence.
Right.
And as I started to shoot more, the writing stuff was going great. I still love to write, but I was getting hired more to be a photographer and to shoot, and which ultimately led to me going to Austin, Texas to cover the Austin City Limits Music Festival in 2007 for Paste Magazine, and that's where I met Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And so that was kind of my big break. I'd done a lot of work in San Francisco for like the Chronicle and SF Weekly, and was still shooting for a bunch of magazines and writing for a bunch of magazines too. But that was kind of the tipping point when I met those guys, and they were like, "We'd love to work with you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And from that point forward for 10 years, I was mainly getting hired to go and photograph things.
Yeah.
And not necessarily getting hired. Although when they figured out that I knew how to write, they were like, "Oh, you can do this and this and this." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm happy to do whatever you guys want me to do." But that's kind of how, it's a long story, but that's how it ultimately ended up happening.
That's wild, man. That's just quite a journey in the industry, and kind of like quick moving, not whatever, but quick moving to a place that probably was a bit comfortable and like exciting and actually enjoyable to be in.
Oh, absolutely.
Compared to like struggling through it, wading through a swamp of defeat for 40 years.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a slog. Or there was parts of it that were kind of a slog, but there was parts of it. I met someone who was connected with Petty and their management team, and then when I went to Austin, I ran into some more people who I met there in Austin who managed Tom, and I shot the show. They were the headliners that night at the Austin City Limits Festival, and it had rained right before their set. I noticed I was kind of sitting on in the photography pit, and it it was kind of still misting. They went on stage. I got a great photo of Mike Campbell stepping to the lip of the stage, Rickenbacker, during "Listen to Her Heart," and just wrote him a thank you note afterwards to Tony Demetriadis and Lawrence Friedman, their managers, and just said, "Here's all the thumbnails of what I shot, and here's this one of Mike that's really good." And they ultimately they liked it, I guess, and got it printed and framed and put in their offices. And so when the time came for, I guess it was the 2008 tour originally when we first started talking, I was moving from San Francisco back to North Carolina, and I was like, there's just no way I can do this right now. And so then we started talking again in 2009 when they were working on the Mojo record, and God, it was like late 2009 when they called and said, "What are you doing for the next 8 months?" And I was like, "Working." and they were like, "Would you want to come and do this?" And I said, "Sure. Can I talk to my wife about it?" And they called, it was really strange. They called on like a Wednesday at like 10 o'clock at night on the East Coast. And so, the phone rings after 9. It's usually like bad news, something bad's happened.
Right.
And they called and had the conversation, and I said, "Well, can I talk to my wife about it?" And they were like, "What? Really?" And I was like, "Yeah, I need to talk to her." So I hung up the phone, and this is before we had kids. She was on the other side of the wall of the room that I was sitting in, and she was like, "Who was that?" And she came walking in, and I was like, that was the guys from the Heartbreakers, and they want me to come and do this tour." And she was like, "Well, what'd you tell them?" And I said, "Well, I told them I need to talk to you." And she was like, "Pick up the phone, call them back, and tell them, yes, that you're doing this." And I was like, "Okay." And so I picked up the phone, called them back, and they were like, "We'd love for you to fly out and come and see rehearsals." And I was like, "Well, should I bring cameras?" And they were like, "No, don't bring any cameras. We just want to meet you and hang out and have you hang with Tom and the band." and see how it feels. And I guess they hadn't had a photographer out in a while. And so I went out and hung out and watched rehearsals, and they played everything under the sun other than Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers songs, like, a bunch of Hank Williams stuff, a bunch of blues songs. And at the end of it, Tom was like, well, you interested in doing this? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. I was a big fan, I mean, I remember when Full Moon Fever came out in 1989. My dad picked me up at baseball practice, and he was like, we need to go by the record shop. Tom Petty just put out his first solo record. And so we went to the record shop, and he got it on cassette and put it in, and we drove home, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. And we got to our house and sat in the driveway. I'll never forget this. And Running Down a Dream came on, and he was like, oh, we can't go inside. We got to listen to the end of this. And so I sat there and listened to the end of it. And I mean, I remember that clear as day. And so what an opportunity to go and work for somebody who, I admired for, since I was 12 years old. I mean, I bought all the records.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. What an opportunity.
So you went on the road with them for 8 months, I guess.
Yeah, did the whole tour. Crosby, Stills, Nash opened some of the dates. ZZ Top, Joe Cocker, the Drive-By Truckers.
Jesus Christ.
My Morning Jacket. And then Chuck Berry opened the last show of the tour, which was awesome. It was great. I got to meet him. In fact, it was hilarious. He came walking off the stage, and Mike Campbell, the guitar player in Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, came and grabbed me, and he's like, hey, come with me. And I was like, okay. And so I followed him, and he grabs me, and he's like, hey, I want you to get a photo of me and Chuck Berry together, because, I mean, those guys idolized Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
I mean, he's their hero, one of their heroes. And so we went to Chuck Berry's dressing room. Door was already shut. He had gone inside. And Mike knocks on the door, and the Chuck's tour manager, and he was infamous or famous, I don't know which, for never having the same band. It was always a pickup band. He never had, at least later in his life, it was always like he would, in that case, was in Phoenix, and his management team was put out the word that he needed a band, and these were the songs, and so he would have a pickup band at every different show that he played most of the time. And he'd also had pickup tour managers. So these guys didn't even really know the guy. They were just kind of veteran managers, road managers who would pick up the gig for the night. And so anyway, this guy answers the door, and Mike says, we'd love to come in. I'd love to get a photo with Chuck if possible. And we go in, myself and Mike and Mike's wife Marcy, and Chuck was sitting in the corner with a towel around his neck, having just finished his set, in a very tall glass of orange juice, which I found out that's what he liked to have to drink after the show. And anyway, we walk in, and Mike's like, Chuck, you're my hero. I just wanted to come in and get a photo or two with you if that's possible. And Chuck was totally gracious and kind. And we got some really great photos, of which I've got printed, one printed from Mike's studio, and he loves it. It's a really cool photo of the two of them kind of looking at each other. And but the one thing I really will never forget about it was, at the end of it, I said, thank you so much, Mr. Berry, for letting us come into your dressing room after the show, and went to stick out my hand to shake his hand. And people talk about basketball players having huge hands. Mm-hmm. Chuck Berry's hands, literally his fingertips went halfway up my wrist, which makes sense if you think about some of the way he plays the guitar. And I've since watched that American Masters documentary on PBS about him, and people commented about the fact that he had just enormous hands. And I mean, literally his hands just swallowed my hand. And it was great. I mean, got to meet Chuck Berry at the end of that tour, which was like the cherry on top of an incredible experience. Yeah. And that was the first tour, and worked with them all the way through the end, through the 17 tour. So
you were in your 20s or 30s?
I had my 30th birthday right before I started working with them.
So you're around 30. You are 30.
Yeah.
At that point, you've been fucking around in music for a minute, or I don't know if I...
Yeah.
I don't know if I cuss on this podcast or not, but you've been doing something with music for a minute. When you're thrown into a situation like that, meeting all these like monster legend people, are you like cool with it by that point where you just kind of act chill and you're too cool to be impressed, or are you like is your mind blown the whole time?
Blown away. I mean, from the time I met the Heartbreakers and getting to spend time with them, one, I'll say it was nothing on their end that made me nervous. They were as kind as anyone could have been, both the band and the road crew. I mean, that road crew had been together. I think when I joined, the next newest guy had been there for 10 years. And so I was not only the new guy, but I was the new guy with a camera around my neck. But those guys welcomed me with open arms, treated me with great love, and just trying to help me do my gig. And the band, absolutely. I mean, especially Tom and Mike and Ben. I'm from Florida. And so originally when we first started having conversations, and then when I got to spend some time with them and they figured out I was from Florida, it was almost like an instant connection. It was like two people looking at each other and kind of recognizing something in each other.
Yeah.
And that first tour, I mean, it was Joe Cocker opened those first shows. I've been listening to Joe Cocker since I was a little kid, and to see him perform with that band, which was a great band, and he was just so kind. I made a point with each of the openers to go to them and say, "Hey, I'm the Heartbreakers photographer, but I'd love to shoot your set too if you're cool with it." And all of them were like, "Absolutely, you can do whatever you want. I had stage access with the Heartbreakers and could go anywhere in the venues." And the same with the openers. All of them were like, "You do what you want to do. And if we can use some of the photos, we'd love to use them." And I did some video content on that tour as well. And so Joe was really famous at one point in time, or there was one instance in his set when he would like jump up and down. And I forget, it might have been Help with My Friends, or I can't remember what song it was that he did it at. There's a video somewhere online on YouTube somewhere of this, but I went and asked him about the infamous Cocker hop, which everyone called it on that tour. And he told me this hilarious story about, years before on the tour, one of his roadies was imitating his hop before Joe got there for sound check and fell through the stage. And he was like, "So luckily I haven't had that happen to me," and just told me this really great story. And he was so kind and gracious and like warm to me. And I'll say that about all those guys on that tour. The ZZ Top guys, I remember when they joined the tour, we were at Summerfest in Milwaukee, and I showed up really early at the venue, and Billy Gibbons was like grilling, and that whole crew was like grilling and throwing horseshoes. And they were like, I went and introduced myself and was like, "Hey, this is what I do, and I'd love to shoot your set." And they're like, "Yeah, do you want to hang out?" And I was like, "Sure, great." So I threw horseshoes with Billy Gibbons one time. The Crosby, Stills, Nash guys opened a handful of those dates as well. And I have a really great memory. We were up in way upstate New York at one of those amphitheaters up there, and I was in Tom's dressing room, and the CSN guys were in the dressing room next door. And Tom and I were talking about something, just kind of hanging out, and he was like, "Hey, hold on a second." And we both got really quiet, and you could hear this singing coming in through the other side of the wall, and it was the CSN guys doing their vocal warm-up. And he's like, "Here, come on." And so we like get up, and we walk across his dressing room, open up the door, and he kind of peers around the edge, and their dressing room door wasn't completely shut. It was kind of cracked. And he was like, "Let's just hang here." And so we just kind of hung there and listened, and we were both like, "Wow, this is really cool." And they're like doing their thing, and it's like it's Crosby, Stills, and Nash, know. And suddenly the door, I forgot if it was one of those guys or their tour manager, the door opens, and we're like there exposed, having sat there and eavesdropping on them, and they all kind of looked at us, and the two of us are sitting there like. And Tom, I'll never forget it. He looked at both of them, and he just kind of smiles, and he's like, "I think you guys are on to something." And it was like, oh my God. Like, I got to hear those guys. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience across the board. Those guys were fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
I knew you were a photographer. I didn't realize, I guess, the scale of how long you were actually like traveling and doing all this stuff. I did some writing for the Relish as well.
Yeah.
And, thought for a minute that I might be interested in music journalism, but every time I like deviated from performance itself, I just kind of my interests don't last that long outside of performance, you know.
I can't perform. I mean, I know a little bit of piano. What my daughter, she's taking lessons now, teaches me. After her lesson, she'll come home and teach me what she's learned. And I know a little bit of guitar, but not a ton. I'm not a musician at all. And so that was the way that I could see myself into that world. Was I know I love records, I love music, I love talking to musicians because I find that whole that process really interesting, whether it's the live thing or the studio thing. And so I've just always been fascinated by it. I've been fascinated by the history of it. I was the guy who would buy records, CDs, albums, whatever the format was at the time, and like read all the liner notes and understand, okay, this person produced this record and they also produced this record, and these guys played on this record, and they also played on these 3 records, and so I should go check these records out. So it was one of those things where I got really into like the history and kind of the network of how musicians connected with producers or bands. That stuff fascinated me. It's always fascinated me.
Well, now you're in a really different world. You're in the world of curating music and facilitating it in a physical world.
Yeah.
That's quite different, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's different. It's like a different way to scratch the itch a little bit. I mean, a lot of people talked to me about it when I was on tour, and I was, towards the latter part of my touring time, Tom and the band was talking about not doing big, massive tours anymore and doing more focused concerts, either residencies or stuff like that. And so I'd been on the road at that point in time 8 years, and most of those years, not only was I working for the Heartbreakers, but when I wasn't out with them, I was working for Widespread Panic. I was working, doing a lot of work with a variety of different artists, going off on shoots to shoot album covers or album artwork stuff. And so most of those years from like 09 to 17, I was out of town 6 to 8 months of the year. And my wife and I started to have kids and building a family. And it was like, I can't really do this anymore. I can't be out this long. And so I knew that like, I wanted to start evolving in a different direction, and being a little bit more discerning with the choices I made with regard to going out and doing, 2-month tour or 6-month tour or whatever. In most cases with the Heartbreakers, they'd fly us home every 2 to 3 weeks. So you got to spend a little bit of time, but still you're gone for a long, long time. And so the venue thing, it was kind of a perfect storm. I'd worked at Ziggy's, had always loved that experience being in a venue. Had been in a lot of venues by that point in time all over the world.
Right.
And had met a lot of musicians and had a lot of contacts within the industry. And then at the same time, from a local perspective, the room became available. There's not much else you can do in that room. It's not like you could turn it into a restaurant,
Big ass restaurant.
Yeah. It's kind of a fairly specific use.
Yeah.
And there weren't a lot of suspects around town to take that gig. I mean, it was kind of, the list was fairly small if they were going to do it with someone locally. By that point in time, had started curating the Crossroads series at Sika, which we'd started in 2011. So I'd been doing that for 6-7 years by that point. Had launched a series at the barn at Renolda Village with Wake Forest, and had done that for a few years. So I'd been doing some curating and booking at that point in time. And then obviously Richard has done it for a long time on a variety of different levels, from the Garage to the Blue Ridge Music Center. And so it felt like a departure in a little bit of ways, but it also kind of felt like a natural evolution in a lot of ways. And at the time, a lot of people were like, well, this will be great. Especially my wife. She was like, you'll be able to stay at home instead of being on the road, and you'll be able to bring your friends who are artists here.
Right.
What she did not anticipate, I don't think, is how much time was going to be required to run a venue. She thought, oh, well, he's going to be at home sleeping in this bed. And little did she know that, it requires a lot, especially in the first couple of years, a lot of time to get the right people in place, set the processes, up such that, everything runs smoothly, and kind of set the template for the business. And those first 2 years was a lot of time spent over there.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of time. And we've got great people who work with us. I mean, I can't say enough about Richard and Brian Ledbetter, my two partners in it, in terms of the managing partners that are involved with the venue kind of on a day-to-day. But like I said before, I mean, a lot of the folks that are in kind of the key positions, Brian Dobb, Rob Ellis, Crow, folks like that, I've known or Richard's known for like 20 years. And so a lot of the success that we've had to date is really due to having those relationships and letting hiring those people, bringing them onto the team, and then letting them be who they are.
Right.
Because they're great, And so it's like, okay, put the best team you have together. It's the whole, adage of never be the smartest guy in the room. I've always said that, like, throughout my life. Like, I want to surround myself with people who, like, I can aspire to do what they do, and I could never do what Brian Dobb does. I mean, he is phenomenal. But hey, I love having him on my team.
Yeah,
he's a great cleanup hitter. If you follow the baseball analogy or anything like that, he's a great cleanup hitter, and we've got that across the board. I mean, that's that. If anything, the success to date of the Ramcat and Gas Hill Drinking Room is totally due to the folks that are there. We all care. Be it, Jeff Jenkins, who's done lights, he's done artist relations. Now he runs our box office most of the time for us. Lori Rorden and Eric Gilstrap, her partner, are now involved with us. She's, been our bar manager the last couple of months. We've tried to surround ourselves with the best of the best and folks who love music, because you got to love music, because it's a hard business to be in to do that job. So I feel really lucky. I mean, it's been an amazing 2 years, and then we had a year of really difficult time. Essentially we closed down almost 2 years to the day from when we opened due to COVID. Mm-hmm. So that the third year was really tough.
That's a year you don't really want to be a tough year, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, we had teed ourselves up for a really strong third year.
Yeah.
In terms of shows we had on the calendar. We really felt like we had gained some momentum, both in, just relationship building with agents and managers and artists, and felt really good about, wow, okay, 2020 is going to be a really strong year for us. And then everything happened the way it happened. And it was devastating. It was totally devastating. We feel like we've picked up some of that momentum this year. It's been tough with all of the various rule changes and restrictions and policies and all of that. But we feel really good about where we are right now. We feel really good about it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I did want to, I'm glad you segued into that, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys took it upon yourselves to do this whole homecoming series. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that wasn't other than staying active. I mean, you weren't making money. It wasn't like you had people coming in, but you stayed putting music out there into the world. Like, how did that idea come to be, and what made you guys do that?
Yeah,
throughout COVID.
I mean, I think it was a part. You're right. That's our mission, right? Is to present music in the community. One. So we felt like it kind of checked that box in terms of, okay, well, if this is the hand we're being dealt and these are the circumstances, well, how do we go about delivering on that mission, even though we can't gather people in the room and we're in the middle of this global health pandemic? So that was kind of the initial thought. And then Brian Dobb and I got together and we thought, okay, well, we'll live stream it. And we just didn't find any platforms that we felt like were dependable, reliable in any way, shape, or form. And that had nothing to do with our internet service going into the building. It had more to do with just the platforms in general. And, I'd watched early on in the pandemic some live streams of people like doing it off their laptop camera.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't want to do that. Like that. The other part of it was, if we're going to do this, we want to do it at the quality that we have presented music in the venue. That was kind of our barometer, right? And if we can't do it to that level of quality, then let's not do this. And so ultimately where we ended up was, okay, Brian, I'll never forget it. We'd gone through like testing 3 or 4 different live stream platforms, and neither one of us were pleased with the results. And he was like, well, I know how to mix, in post, and you know how to cut videos, multicam videos. I've seen you do it on the road. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, why don't we just do that? And yeah, it was going to require a lot more work on our end. But we can ensure the quality of it, and we could kind of work at our own pace, because we could film a bunch and then not film for a couple of days, depending on if we, availability of artists, or, God forbid, if someone got sick or anything like that. And so it kind of allowed us to shoot a bunch of stuff and then go away for a couple of weeks, and he would work on his stuff and I'd work on my stuff, and we'd kind of trade files back and forth. So it gave us that freedom, but it also ensured the quality of the program. And then further, and I didn't really see these two aspects of it initially. One, we had furloughed everyone, including ourselves, in terms of salary, but it allowed us to pay Brian. And he was our, mine and Richard's first employee that we hired. And it was really important to us to try and figure out a way to pay him during the pandemic. And so that allowed us to pay Brian. And, it also presented an opportunity, or at least as we got into it, that it was kind of a exercise in preserving sanity in a lot of ways, in a time that was totally insane for everyone involved. We were doing what we do, which is present music. Yeah, were we filming it and was no one in the room? Yeah, so it was a little different, but we were bringing artists in. They were able to perform and share their art, so that was important to us, and it was like, well, that's what we were doing before, so that checks that box.
Right.
And it was supporting the music community, which is another huge aspect of what we do. So in a lot of ways, it was like exactly what we should do. And it just took us a little while to get there. And then once we got into it, we realized some of the fringe benefits, not fringe, really huge benefits of bringing people into the room, us working, Brian working, seeing live music. I'll never forget some of those first recording sessions. It was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Like, we're getting to see this. I felt like almost guilty in a lot of ways, because no one else was getting to experience this. But the 3 or 4 of us that were in the room producing these things got to. And it was really funny, we did 49 of them, 50 of them, I think. The bands would show, like, as we got into it, we'd say, okay, be there at 4:00 or be there at 5:00. And people would show up at like 4:30, and they were like, I just want to get out of my house and like see some other people, And so they would show up earlier and earlier and earlier and stay later and later and later, and we did it all safely masked and socially distanced. But you could tell that the enjoyment that we were getting out of doing it was also being shared with the enjoyment on the artist side, of getting to play, and expressing themselves and getting out of their house, and so that was, it was an amazing experience. And Richard, being the really smart guy that he is, he was like, this is a really amazing, like, sociological document of a music community at a given time.
Right.
And I mean, that's well over my head. So I was like just thrilled to be able to do it and have something to do. Whereas he was like, 20 years from now, this is something that the city of Winston-Salem should be really proud of, and that we can be very proud of, and that the artists involved can be really proud of, because it's kind of a snapshot of a moment in time, which, again, I never saw it like that. But when he mentioned it, I was like, hey, you're right.
Yeah.
It's true.
That was a trippy experience for me when I came down there.
You had a great session.
I came down right around Christmas.
Yep.
I got to sneak in there and be a part of the Christmas episode.
Yeah.
And, yeah, man, I hadn't, I guess I was coming out of a strange time period anyway. Mm-hmm. Had a long hiatus, wasn't playing a lot of shows. I released a record in 2019, and then that was my last show until I came down there. That was my first time playing music in a room with other people in, I think, a year and 2 months or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, from October 2019 to December 2020.
Wow.
So then, doing it, it was almost like I went down there with this attitude of like, I have to see if I can still do this or not. Like, I wonder if I'll be able to perform in front of people and stuff. And, of course, you guys all being, I don't know, just kind Home Sweet Home was kind of an appropriate name for it in a way, because you guys are all the familiar faces, or the majority of the familiar faces that I expect to see around shows of mine in town.
Yeah.
it was just like, oh shit, okay, I can do this, and Richard's here, and that makes everything better.
Right.
Shit
right.
like that.
Well, you had a great set. I mean, it was a really good set. Like you said, you snuck into the Christmas episode, but the set was super. I remember it being super tight and being like, wow. And you were like, I hadn't played in 13 months or 14 months, and I was like, that was a really strong set for not having played for a long time.
I think I had a lot to. I mean, and I thank you for saying that. It did feel like a strong set, or I had a lot of. There was a lot of energy from me coming out, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think it was because of that break, and because I just felt like I had a lot to kind of dust off, you know. And so when I finally did around people, it was just like, bam! It felt really like I was very had a lot in it, you know. Had a lot in it, a lot of skin in the game, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was an awesome experience. I felt like going into it, I knew a lot of musicians in Winston. And through that experience, I met a whole bunch more musicians that I didn't know. And even more so than that, got to really focus on, okay, I mean, not only, filming it, and experiencing in the venue, but then going back and editing it, I became really familiar with a lot of musicians in Winston,
which is cool.
Which is really, I mean, it's a perfect thing for someone who is curating music in a community.
Yeah.
And subsequently, I've had conversations with other musicians in town who were like, man, that series is great because I'm playing out so much and doing my own stuff that it allowed me to like familiarize myself with other musicians in town. And the perfect example of that is Doug Davis told me this. He's like, I'm constantly playing in all these different bands, and I never get to go and see shows necessarily. And so I got to watch these episodes and really familiarize myself with the other musicians that I've been missing for all these years around town. And so that was really cool. It was hugely beneficial to me. And I think a lot of other people were like, not only did it provide some entertainment and some musical content during a time when we had none, but it was an opportunity for them to kind of refresh themselves on who's out playing and making music.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, you got to I commended that project a lot for similar reasons to that. Also because I related to what you said. Like, I was starting to get. It didn't feel right. I don't want to. It's not okay. I don't know how to say this exactly. Obviously, I'm stumbling around. I don't mean to sound negative about what we all experienced, and especially for musicians who are working musicians who are just trying to make like $300 every week. I felt for those people, but to see the way that music then became this really kind of like unimpressive presentation, and people basically were on Facebook Live like begging people for money and like, please just whatever. It was a downer, and it was hard to watch that happen to the music community. And sad to watch it happen. And I never was willing to like live stream through like shitty speakers with my own music. So then to see you guys care enough to go to that length and have a multi-camera setup and, treat the whole thing really professionally and treat it with some dignity. And then me getting to see, like other people who during that time too, just in like the heart of quarantine, I remember basically like every day some new video would come up on Facebook that would just kind of remind you of what it felt like to have a normal life and be around people, and it would just make you cry because you just like missed that, or you felt bad or you felt awe-inspired by the people who worked in hospitals or different things. And then getting to see other musicians who I'm like, thank God they're still okay, and like they're still doing their thing. And they're still being weird, or they're still wearing their hat or whatever it is that they do. Just getting to remember what other people's personalities were like through that series was kind of a huge deal. And it was I don't know, it just wasn't, it was comforting to me in some kind of way.
Oh, that is awesome to hear. And I'm the same way. I mean, after a given session and we'd pack up, we'd all kind of like look at each other and be like, well, I guess we're not going to see each other till next Thursday, and it was kind of a bummer. I remember driving home from those things at night and similar thing, just being like, I wish we could get back to this. And like, like, it was great to see Brian and Richard and Jeff Jenkins, sometimes Michael Schmidt, lit the whole thing the whole time. It was great to work with all those guys and get to be around each other, because at that point in time, to your point, no one, we were in the heart of the lockdown. No one, you weren't seeing anyone.
Yeah.
And it was like this thing I looked forward to, and I'd wake up the morning of those shoots and be like, oh, this is going to be great. I can't wait. And then I'd drive home after the shoot and just be like, God, I got to wait a whole nother week to do that again. And yeah, I got to edit during, the time between the shoots, but, it definitely kept me sane. That whole thing was such a roller coaster of, waiting for the governor, press conference, in 2 weeks to find out what the next rule was going to be,
Right.
and just this roller coaster of emotion from, being really sad and depressed, whether it was, personally or about our business, to being happy because, hey, it looks like we might be coming out of this, to then going back to being angry because we're not out of it. It was just this whole cycle of crazy emotions at the time. And the one real grounding, consistently happy, exciting aspect of any of that time for a year were these sessions, and that was, it was awesome. I'm really proud of it, I'm really, really proud of the way that was pulled off, the way it was presented. It was a huge amount of work, but man, I got to echo Richard now that he said it. Like, what a great document, and it's going to be there forever. It's on YouTube unless YouTube goes up,
Right.
and dies. And then I guess, we have all the videos, so I can upload it to whatever's next, whatever platform's next. But it's a really cool document, something I'm really proud of.
Yeah, you should be, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
It was a good project.
Yeah, for sure.
So Ramcat, you could finally, I don't know how long it's been now that you guys have been able to have people. In my first setback, there were big capacity restrictions, and now things are a little different.
Yep.
And then, of course, I don't know if you can just tell me now, and if you don't want to talk about this particular aspect, we can cut it right out.
No.
But obviously, it's been harder for a lot of venues now with different businesses deciding whether or not they want to do vaccine restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And, and of course, you've had your share of negative responses to Ramcat's policies on that issue lately.
Yeah. Our whole perspective on it was we were closed for 13 months. Could we have figured out some sort of loophole to get open again in some way, or done it illegally? I'm sure we could have. That didn't really sit right with any of us. One, it's not the right thing to do, and it was against the law.
There's that.
Two, like I've said, the folks who work with us at the Ramcat, and the musicians that are a part of our musical community, I've known a lot of these people for a long time. And if my actions or inactions or bad decisions in that case got anyone sick, I couldn't live with myself.
Yeah.
It would have just crushed me. And so the decision was made fairly early on to kind of try and follow the science and follow the medical professionals' advice. Because I'm not a doctor, and neither is Richard or Led. But our thought being, what? Like, let's do the right thing here as best we possibly can. And so that was kind of the thought during the real part of the shutdown. And then as we were rolling out of that, and they said, this is the rules that you're gonna have to live by. Okay, well, it's already a hard business, but we'll try and make this work. And the restrictions were tough. We're 1,004 in the big room in the Ramcat, and they were only allowing us to put 138 people in the rooms. That's roughly 13%.
Damn.
That doesn't work, economically speaking.
Yeah.
There's no way you can make that work, honestly. We were and are extraordinarily lucky that our landlords were willing to work with us during the time we were shut, and even during the time that we had to open under restricted capacity. So I can't say enough about our landlords for just being willing to say, hey, we want you guys, there on the other side of this whole thing. And I would say that largely about everyone involved, not only our landlords, but Special Event Services, who does all the lights and sound in the big room. They essentially said, don't pay us until you can come back and you can work. And we were like, wow, okay, this is great. A lot of our other creditors, Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership, we got a loan when we started the business. They essentially tabled it and said, until you guys come back, don't worry about it right now. And what an amazing, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to stay open.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those folks. Once we got reopened in April, the crowds were great. Even in a limited capacity, people were really excited to go and see music and would probably have jumped through any number of hoops to make it happen on their end. And as it's reopened, it's been a challenge. I mean, we put our mask mandate in place in early August, prior to the city putting theirs in place. We put the vaccine, proof of vaccine or negative COVID tests in place in late August or mid-August. And we just thought, hey, this is the best way in which we can move forward at this point in time, and gives us the best shot for this business to continue. Like I said before, I couldn't live with myself if we welcome patrons back into the room, our staff, artists, and someone got sick. I mean, that was not an option for me. And the flack that we've gotten, we've gotten some flack. It's not something, it used to bug me really bad. I'll be, honest. It used to bug me really bad. And then I just kind of started to think about it, and I was like, we have other rules in place too. This is just another rule. I mean, you have to pay for your drink at the bar. That's a rule, right? And you have to wear pants when you're inside of our venue. That's another rule. And we charge for tickets. That's another rule. So this is just another rule. And we're operating a private business. And so we get to make the rules. And if you don't like the rules, that's fine. You can go somewhere else and do whatever you want to do in another person's business. But those are the rules that we established and we feel strongly about. And just kind of along the lines of what we said at the beginning, we're going to let medical professionals and the health experts dictate how we change those rules and evolve them. And they will. It's a fluid situation. But we felt like we were in really good company as we were starting to discuss those rules, because folks like Cat's Cradle and the 930 Club in D.C. and the Orange Peel and a lot of the venues that we aspire to be, and that we one day hope that we're lumped in that crowd. Those are the rules they're making, and the big monolith Live Nation finally came along, and as of October 4th, in every Live Nation venue across the country, you have to show either proof of vaccination or a negative test. And a lot of other organizations, not music venues, the Arts Council of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, SECA, a lot of other folks are implementing the same policy, and so whereas we felt like we were on an island in mid to late August a little bit, and we caught our fair share of flack for it, we're in pretty good company now. And, I mean, I don't like it. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't want to restrict anyone from coming and seeing a show.
Yeah.
The music business is already hard enough, getting people out. Adding all of this, health restrictions and a global pandemic and the politics and the, civil liberties and these are my individual rights and I don't need to show you my information. All of that makes this job and this business a lot harder, And so, I'm looking forward to the day when we don't have to do any of these things. I don't like wearing a mask. Yeah. Am I willing to wear a mask to keep myself and my family and the people I love and the community that I operate a business in safe? There's no question.
Yeah.
But, it's... initially, the response was very vocal and very negative online, but the vast majority of the people that we interact with at the front door are telling us thank you.
Well, there's another silver lining to that. The comment sections were incredibly entertaining to read. It was really fun to get to watch that. Yeah. So just contributing more entertainment to the community like you always do. and I appreciate it.
Yeah, it only really got weird when people started to like call my cell phone number from Michigan and Arizona, and I'll never forget the first guy that called. He just berated me for like 30 minutes, just straight. I couldn't even get a word in. And finally, when he took a breath, I was like, "Sir, we will refund your tickets. No questions asked. Just tell me the show you bought tickets to, and I'll refund them right now." And he was like, "I haven't bought tickets to your venue. I don't even live in North Carolina. I live in Michigan." And so that's when I realized that somehow my phone number had ended up on some private group, you know, and then
God, that's so over the top.
Yeah, you know, and that became a little weird, you know. But other than that, like I said, I mean, there's a very vocal group online and on social media that wants to share their opinion. But the vast majority of folks who have come, and that's patrons, that's artists, have said, "Got no problem showing this to you here."
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like your average reasonable person, no matter which side of that they fall on, because and I'll say there's such a thing as a reasonable person,
absolutely,
who probably doesn't want to get vaccinated or can't get vaccinated.
Sure.
You know, it's a trippy time, and I think it's fine to try to be understanding to all the different perspectives that are in every person, you know.
Absolutely.
Every person has the potential to see it all sorts of different ways,
you
know. But any reasonable person is probably just going to like offer that same level of kind of understanding to other people and business owners and different things too, and just understand. Like when I go to the grocery store, I choose to try to operate myself. I try to handle myself in a way that is consistent with whatever the employees have to do. Mm-hmm. If the employees have to wear masks, then I'm probably just going to wear a mask just because. And I see in the grocery store that most people don't, but I just kind of have this tendency to want to make the people who have no choice but to be there, I just want to make it less hard on them because it's not their fucking fault. And like they have no choice but to be there. And I would hope that your average reasonable person would think the same about a decision like this by a private venue like yours, is that you guys are the people who have to try to figure out how to navigate this time period. You're doing what you can, and the people that you're working with have to do the best they can to figure out how to make this shit, you know, sustainable for everybody.
Totally.
So, you know, I hate that you got so much negative feedback or whatever, but
it happens.
Glad you guys are still here on the other side of the whole COVID thing.
Well, absolutely. And if I often just try and remind myself that if we didn't make this decision, what would be the blowback been, you know, if we didn't require proof of vaccination or ask people to wear masks or, you know, offer the negative test as another way in which an avenue that you could come and see a show, you know? And so there's always, on every side of a decision, you're going to get blowback, you know, regardless. This is an interesting time in that, you know, we're getting a lot of negative feedback from folks who either don't want to get vaccinated or believe that we're treading on their civil rights.
Right.
And then on the other side of the decision, we have people who are like, I really appreciate what you're doing. I just can't, I don't feel safe going to a show indoors right now.
Yeah, there is that.
I'm getting it from both, we're getting it from both sides, which is really interesting, you know, because I try and think about it and I'm like, well, if we had not, you know, I feel like we're doing it as much as we possibly can to keep everyone safe. I don't know what more we could do to make those people who don't feel safe yet to come inside and see a show. I don't know what I could do. And I should talk to more of those people and say, is there anything else I could be doing? I mean, the socially distant piece of it, I guess I could do that, but it just becomes untenable at a certain point in terms of the economics of only having 138 people inside the room, you know? And so it's a difficult kind of catch-22 in a lot of ways, because I'm either with one audience, if I make one decision, they're going to, you know, not like it. If I make another decision, you know, and for another audience, they're not going to like it. Currently, our current policy, I get it from both sides.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's really tricky because even without all that, it's like on top of all that, trying to make this policy. If you didn't have it in place, you'd feel like you were running the risk of it being more dangerous for everybody there, whether it was vaccinated or not. It's like with the pandemic still being in existence, that does change it, because I don't know about you, but for me, there's still some paranoid part of my mind that talks me out of doing a lot of things. Like if my friends asked me to go to a bar or a party or something, definitely my head, and which probably is not the most rational thing for me to be feeling.
It's
but
very natural though right now.
Yeah, it's just like none of us have ever experienced a pandemic before, and it's kind of hard, regardless of the science and the confidence that we might have about where we are with everything. It's just sort of hard to really fully embrace social life the way that we used to after like a full year of not experiencing it.
Yep, I agree. It's a very strange days indeed, right? And I look forward to the day when we don't have to do this. Now, is that in the near future? As I've told people time and time again since March of 2020, my crystal ball is broken. I'm not in the predicting business anytime soon or anymore. And I think that we still got a little bit of a road to hoe here. But I do look forward to the day when we don't have to talk about this anymore, because that will be a day when I don't have to restrict anyone or put any policies in place, and we can get back to, hey, like, let's just put good music in the room. And that's still the focus. It's just all of this additional layering of additional things to be concerned about. It's tough. It's already a tough business.
Yeah.
And since reopening in April, despite it being tough and catching flack and, the rules changing constantly, et cetera, and making this, business difficult to operate, the one thing that all of us involved in the venue can still identify, perfect example is this past weekend, is like when that show ended on Saturday, all of us kind of looked at each other and were like, God, it was just magic. Like the magic of live music, the communal experience of getting in a room with other people and enjoying someone performing on stage, and that artist emoting their art and their emotion and skill, and the collective energy that creates. I mean, you talk to anyone who was in the Beloved show on Saturday night with Code 7, and it was like, it was great. It was an amazing communal experience, and I believe in that. I mean, it's the closest thing I've ever found to religion. Is just that mutual experience of people enjoying live music and the collective energy created by the audience and the artist. And those are the things that continue to propel me forward. As much, the flack stuff at this point in time, it's just kind of like, I just got to get to the next show. It's like a dopamine hit almost. It's like, I just got to get to the next show and see someone perform great this week. It's Shamar Allen and Deshaun Hickman and Sierra Hull and All Them Witches and Buddy Guy. Like, we got a stacked lineup this week. I'm going to get a full-on dopamine hit, and it's going to propel me all the way through the end of the year, or at least for a couple of weeks. And that's all I need. It's just a reminder of why we're doing this, why we're here. And the magical moments that are possible, that's what I would say in all of my music career, the stuff I've done in music, that's the through line, right? Is like, whether I was writing about it, taking pictures of it, on tour with it, in a venue with it, it was always, well, you just got to get to those magical moments. And them, you've seen them, you've experienced them from the stage, you've experienced it as a fan in the crowd. Everyone knows it who's seen enough live music where it's like, wow, that was really special, and the Home Sweet Home series were those hits for us during a really dark time, and it kept us pushing forward. And now in these concerts that we're doing now, even though everyone's masked and you got to show up your health records when you walk in the door along with your ID. Those are the things that push you forward, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's just a reminder of all that other stuff is just ancillary, and just focus on this, because if you can do this and do it right, people are going to recognize it, and people appreciate it. And I mean, all those people walking out of that venue Saturday night coming up to us being like, thank you. I've never seen Beloved, and I've been listening to their music for 20 years, and this was incredible. Like, that fills my sail. It puts gas in the tank for the next, dealing with whatever, someone calling and saying that we're, Nazis or whatever. It's just like, okay, I just need to get to the next show.
Man, so many people are Nazis these days.
Right, exactly.
Good Lord. Did you listen to a lot of music during lockdown?
Yeah, a lot of instrumental stuff.
Really?
A lot of jazz. Originally, I feel like initially I listened to a lot of jazz, and then I found myself going back and listening to my parents' records because they were like super comforting. It was something that I was like, a lot of Aretha Franklin. Because I super familiar. Been listening to it since I was a kid. It was like a warm blanket, and so I remember digging well into like my parents' vinyl collection and being like, I didn't realize it initially, but then as I started to listen to it, and then I think it really drove the point home when I went and looked on like my recently played on Spotify, and I was like, wow, this is like all of my parents' music, and I started to think about it, and I was like, yeah, on the vinyl side too, I've been listening to nothing but like all that old music that I grew up on as a kid. And it was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I'm freaked out by this whole thing. And so I'm revisiting something that feels warm and comfortable and familiar.
Yeah. I finally started listening to music again, which was like, I was kind of in a world of listening to mostly like words prior to that. And I listen to a lot of talks and a lot of podcasts and stuff. And that's just, that's where my brain goes a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than music. But around when I first like really lost my job and was like going to be at home, I started listening to a lot more music, songwriters. I mean, I was getting in touch, I think, with a lot of my an old side of myself. Mm-hmm. And I started noticing I was listening to Stan Rogers a lot. Do you listen to him?
No, I don't know.
He's this Canadian guy from, I think, the late 70s.
Uh-huh.
Really great songwriter, but all his songs, not literally all, but the vast majority of his songs, they all sound like these sort of like sailor ballads from 1870 or something.
Sea shanty kind of stuff.
Yeah, yes. And then the context, a little less, like Irishy piratey.
Yeah.
But like this one song, the Northwest Passage, is literally just a cappella chant with him and like four guys, all about like longing for the day that their ship can make it through the frozen lakes to find a travel route to China or something. And it's all about it's pretty much, it was all about the time period in which Canada was like forged in the world and mastered and discovered and stuff. And I would listen to that shit and like really break down from it, because I was like, this music is like emblematic of a time when we brought society into existence and how hard it was to accomplish that. And now I feel like I'm like watching society cease to exist. Yeah. And it really fucked with me on an emotional level. Like it just, I don't know. It was trippy, something so traditional, you know?
Well, and I think that also it's interesting like that's the stuff you gravitated to, because like I would assume those songs are about like perseverance and fortitude. Exactly. And like keep pushing. And you were going through the middle of a global health pandemic.
That makes sense.
So it was almost like a bolstering of your like inner spirit to be like, keep going, you're fine, keep going. You know, you were finding like rejuvenation and energy and like that persevering spirit from listening to that artist.
I think that's probably exactly right. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah. I went for like the holy hell, the world's going to hell. I need something familiar and warm and like, oh, Aretha Franklin. Never loved a man the way I loved you. Oh, I can listen to this.
Speaking of familiar and warm, man, I want to know if you think I feel like there might be. I feel like there's a big nostalgia factor right now, and I wonder if it's because of that aspect of quarantine. Like, there's so many things in popular culture that are like they're like a part of a simpler time, and there's a lot of, I don't know. Anyway, you get the idea. Yeah. It's like, and I'm wondering what that means about music too. Like, if you think that this, I'm wondering if you notice the same thing as I do, I'm honestly wondering for myself if this is going to have like a massive impact on the arts, and if like if nostalgia for what used to be popular culture is going to like partially dominate what is popular culture now.
Yeah, I think you're probably onto something. I don't know. I mean, I think at the outset of the pandemic, I was like, man, this is going to create some great art. You know, like someone's going to come up with a brilliant idea out of this, you know, and then the first thing that came out was like Tiger King or whatever. And I was like, oh God, like this is what we're producing out of this? Like, no, you know, but that was way too early, right? You know, I mean, that was so early in the whole thing.
Yeah, that thing was already in the chamber.
It was already in the can. Like those guys had that thing done. They were working on the marketing by that point in time.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and so I think we're probably still too early on it in terms of just like the ingestion, creation, you know, whatever process that an artist does, whether you're a filmmaker, writer, musician, etc. I think that's still playing out. And so I think that the albums over the next 5 years, you know, in some cases, you know, folks who work quicker, in some cases, folks who work longer, it'll be really interesting to see, you know, the films that come out. To your point, like, yeah, if you're in the middle of the pandemic and you were looking for something that made you feel warm or familiar or nostalgic, does that play itself out in your film, your book, your album, or a song or whatever? I mean, I think that it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, what comes out of this thing, artistically speaking. You know, like, I mean, like, I read the novelist Colson Whitehead a lot, you know. He's an amazing writer. He wrote The Underground Railroad, which then became a TV series on Netflix. He wrote The Intuitionist. He's written a bunch of really cool stuff, and I'm curious to see, like, I think he's a Nobel Prize winning writer, but I'm curious to see like what someone like him does, you know, what he's got, how this impacted him.
Yeah,
because he's an amazing writer. I read everything he writes. He's one of those folks. It's like, you know, John Prine. If John Prine were still alive and he put out a record, I'd obviously buy it. You know, Dylan. You know, I'm really interested to see what comes out of Dylan from all of this.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it doesn't affect him at all. You know, but it'll be interesting to see what that output looks like and how it's reflective of the time it was created. You know, I mean, I just think about it from the musicians I know personally, who were like, well, I did this, or I did a solo record because I couldn't get together with anybody.
Right.
And in a lot of those cases, it was like they're very much live tracking in the studio type musicians who aren't like, hey, I'll record this and I'll send it to this person and they'll record their piece and then I'll pass it to this next person and they record their piece. There's musicians who operate in that way who the pandemic was like, oh, that's already how I work, is I record my stuff and then pass it to somebody to lay drums or put a guitar part on it, and it's all kind of conceived piecemeal.
Right.
But the guys I know who are live guys are like, oh, I put out a solo acoustic instrumental guitar record because that's the only thing I could do, you know? And it's like, so I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see what the you know, effect of all of this is on just art in general, you know?
Yeah, it will. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I feel like sometimes it froze people in time. I have this thought that I guess I've never actually shared with anyone that's sort of like, well, if you weren't relevant before the pandemic, you'll never be relevant because it froze everyone where they are permanently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if that's obviously a fiction that my head has dreamed up for some reason, and I don't know why. But I think sometimes as a part of that whole thought process, I think to myself, I don't give a fuck about what's new coming out. I give a fuck what my friends put out and like the shit that I already love. Mm-hmm. And I guess I have a bad attitude, I think, for newness rather than nostalgia these days. I guess because for a year, everything I heard that was new, that was news, pissed me off. And everything I longed for happened, you know, a year or more ago.
I got you. What did you write a lot during the pandemic?
I did. I started writing again.
Did you?
So I wrote I've shifted in a way where I write. I used to write like longer collections of songs, I guess, records, and I wrote at least two that are, I think, a little shorter. I might have wrote three actually that are a little shorter than 10 songs or 12 songs or whatever. But I got way more back in touch with all of my creativity and just getting a more clear picture of the things that I'm interested in and actually willing to do. I mean, that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Is just like I had the Red House Songwriter Sessions, which was a YouTube channel years ago that I ran with my old guitar player and bass player, the trio. And a little while into that project, it became clear to me, like, I didn't go to UNCSA. I don't know anything about what I'm doing. The lighting is bad. The video is bad. The audio is even bad. Everything about this just is horrible. I lost motivation to do that for a while. But I've always wanted to do something like this where I just have like real serious, like real at length and like enjoyable conversations with people. And kind of celebrate what I do here at the house, because, like you mentioned, it's just a cool space.
Yeah,
I love having people out here and just being like, "Fucking look at all the trees."
Yeah,
it's nice.
Totally. Well, I'm a big fan of that too. I'm a big fan of like the long form journalism.
Yeah,
like I love Mark Maron's podcast. I love conversations, just because we've gotten to the point in the news, especially here in the United States, everything is a headline or something scrolling across the bottom of your TV.
Yeah.
There's no depth to it. It's all like as deep as a puddle, you know?
And worse than everything is so ideological in one direction or the other. And there's no, I mean, people talk about objectivity and neutrality now as if it's like lame. Like that's not to be strived for or practiced. You know, that's for fucking whatever.
Yeah.
How stupid is that?
I know.
And, we're so out of touch with the arts and culture and all these things that actually make us feel bonded to one another.
Yep.
And of course, the media is horrible about this. And that's, years ago, when I stopped writing for The Relish, and I enjoyed writing for The Relish, like I missed that gig. It was super fun. I got to interview Chris Stapleton one time.
It's awesome.
It was like one of the coolest things in my whole life.
Yeah.
And they gave me that opportunity. But I went to Lynn at the time and was like, I really want, y'all really have to think about using video or long form audio or something in this, because like that will make you relevant. And she was like, I really like that idea. I think that would really work. I don't get to make those decisions. And the people who do make those decisions have decided that it's not worth investing in at this point. And now, the only headlines I see are just ideological pop things that make you open up a thing that says, this is behind a paywall, give us $1. Fuck off.
Exactly right.
I don't need your paper.
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Right. No, you're exactly right, man. I miss the long form piece, because a lot of things that people talk about, whether it's just like a daily news thing or just an opinion thing, none of this can be done in 15 seconds or less, or in a 30-second Instagram video. You know, like the writers that I like, the interviewers that I like, the shows that I like, it's deeper than that, and they take their time, know, and unfortunately we've gotten so far away from that with especially social media and just, it's like I said, it feels like everything is like just this deep, and, perfect example, Sunday night, John Moreland performed. Like, you could never accuse John of being like a shallow songwriter.
No.
He takes his time. He very much has a thing. It made me so unbelievably happy to watch him perform the other night, 90 minutes by himself on the stage, and had everyone in that room in the palm of his hand. I mean, everyone, all the way back, 170 something people in the room, just completely hanging on every word.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in 2021 very much.
No, it don't.
And so those kinds of folks, the Mark Marons, the Colson Whiteheads, The folks who know what they do and are comfortable enough in themselves to do it and know that if they do it correctly, everyone else is going to identify with it and go, I like that too. I like that stuff, you know. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know why that's the case, but I tend to gravitate to stuff that I know there's a process there and it took a while.
Well, you know, I don't think you're alone in that, especially looking at what podcasts and stuff have done to the world. I mean, it's incredible the fact that YouTube and podcasts have just changed. I mean, they've changed network television. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Network television, for as long as it's existed, has told, you know, not that it hasn't ever done its research and learned with how people responded to it, but it really has been the delivery system that dominated the way that the marketplace for media looked. And people just undermined the whole thing. And to the degree that now companies like NBC and shit are like looking at YouTube and being like, well, we got to adjust what we're doing based on that, because like these YouTube people are getting 1 million viewers a day or some shit. It's incredible.
It is incredible.
The way this shit has happened. You're not alone in noticing what that's like. And I think it's probably for the better. Of course, there's all sorts of odds and ends that come with it. I mean, I worry, you know, given that we're both in like the live experience business when it comes down to it, it's a bummer sometimes knowing that like you have the potential here to use these platforms to like engage with people, but that doesn't translate necessarily into like a live experience, which is, I think for both of us, that's really where our hearts are. I want to be on stage performing in front of people, and you have a stage. Like we need the live experience, but
well, it can't be replicated. I mean, a lot of people during the middle of the pandemic were like, are you scared that this is going to completely go away? You know, is that going to be the net result? And I think that was pushed forward when like AMC and all the movie theaters were selling off all the theaters. And I'm somebody who loves going to the movies. And I mean, I remember going and seeing Empire Strikes Back as a little kid, and a cockroach jumped on my aunt's shoulder and she freaked out. And I remember Chewbacca screaming. And I mean, I remember that vividly in my mind. As a kid growing up through elementary school and then high school, I'd go to the movies by myself, you know, and my parents were always like, are you going to the movies with a friend? And I'd be like, no, go by myself and sit in the back of the theater and watch the movie. I don't want to talk to anyone while I'm there. Why do I need someone to be there with me?
Right.
And then when I started dating my wife, I told her the same thing. She'd be like, you're going to the movie by yourself? And I'd be like, yeah, if you don't want to go, then I'll just go watch the movie by myself. And I last week went and saw the new James Bond movie by myself, you know,
yeah.
And I love that. Now I understand, you know, that during the pandemic when social gathering wasn't going to be happening, that these companies had a huge real estate play with a lot of these theaters, and they were thinking, okay, well, you know, maybe the movie industry, in terms of the consumption of it's going to change and go to online and go to all the various streaming platforms, et cetera.
Right.
You know, do I hate that? Yeah, I hate it. Can I see my way through to that logic? Absolutely. What do I think is going to happen? I think your art house cinemas like Aperture are always going to be around. And I think the IMAX theater is always going to be around. But that middle ground, that's going to be a tough road to hoe, you know? And I say that being a huge movie fan. Now, you look at it on the live music side, there's just no replacing standing in a venue that's packed to the brim, elbow to elbow with a bunch of other fans, screaming your lungs out and being completely excited about the band or artist that's on that stage.
Right.
There's no replacing it. You can't do it on a streaming platform. The Bruce Springsteen concert that they put out, you know, during the pandemic, Springsteen on Broadway was great. Would I have preferred to see it in the theater and see Bruce on the stage? Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and so I have a hard time thinking that it's going to completely go away. Now, will it change? Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, we're going to be living with the ramifications of what we've just gone through far beyond our lifetimes.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't kid myself to think that it's not going to change our business and our industry. But I hold out hope again, like I'm a firm believer, and I say this all the time, that there is a collective energy created. When the lights go down and an artist walks on stage and they hit those first notes and the lights go up and the crowd reacts, there is a completely independent form of energy that's created there, and it's not replicated.
This project that I'm doing for Aperture, I'm kind of talking to community members about film and stuff, and interviewed someone from Forsyth Tech who mentioned a sociologist who had a term for what you're describing, which was collective effervescence, which is just that energetic, that fuzzy, fizzing experience that you can have in a room full of people that you just cannot have on your own or whatever.
No, I used to, like, when I got off the road, there's this moment before any band, whether it was Petty and the Heartbreakers, any of the bands I worked with over the years, there's that moment like 5 to 10 minutes before stage time where like there's like an energy, and it's different than the energy that's created when they walk on stage and the lights go up, and that's a completely unique thing, but it's almost like a tenseness, everyone's getting ready for the show, and it's like this weird, it's an anxious energy maybe a little bit. But I found myself in the years that I toured, I was like, man, I'm addicted to this energy. I'm really addicted to it. Like, I'd love to walk through, when Petty was out on tour, I'd love to walk through the arena and just kind of feel the crowd a little bit. And those guys, because they couldn't walk through the arena and feel the crowd, would always ask, like, what's it like out there? Like, what do you think? It's a good crowd? And I'm like, man, their energy's wild tonight. This is going to be a fun night, And you could sense it either way. If it was a bad crowd, dud crowd, that kind of thing. But I was like totally obsessed with that energy, and I didn't really figure it out, or I couldn't really wrap my head around it too much. But then when I got off the road, I was like, man, I'm not going to have that energy anymore. It's going to be, and then we started the Ramcat, and it was like, oh, the energy's still there. It's just a different form of it,
Yeah.
And it's still that kind of anxious, excited, anticipatory energy, and it's, like I said, it's different than the one when the lights go up and everyone's like, oh my gosh, we're here, but it's just as addictive for me, at least. And I love it. I love that aspect of it. And so again, I just don't think that stuff can be replicated. It's hard. That's a human experience, and human experience in that way, that's really difficult. I don't know. Maybe it can be, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everyone will start live streaming and no one will go to shows moving forward.
I can't see it.
I don't see it either.
I do understand that conclusion sometimes as well. I mean, it does. All aspects of life seem to be given that now as an option, and it's pretty remarkable that. I mean, like this Halloween movie that just came out it went to theaters and fucking Peacock.
Yeah,
like
immediately.
It's incredible. Like,
right.
Who would have thought 2 years ago that anybody would do that, But,
that was a sign of a bad, like a movie that went straight to video.
Yeah.
That was like, you didn't want that.
Exactly.
But now that's like the norm.
That was like from the $2 bin at Walmart.
Right.
Yeah.
If you saw a real credible actor with a film in that bin, you were like, what happened to that guy? You know? But now it's like, oh no. I mean, I watched the first episode of Succession last night, which everyone has been like waiting on pins and needles for. And I mean, it debuted the first episode last night online on the HBO app, and I don't know how many. I haven't seen the numbers yet of how many people watched it, but I'm assuming it's in the tens of millions. And how cool! Like it's a different paradigm. It's a whole different model for these guys.
I mean, yeah, I'm glad that, and I guess touching back to some of what we were talking about before. People are now more liberated. Like the marketplace of content is more liberated than ever, where people aren't. There's like also a bunch of distrust for the entertainment industry. It's like people don't want to deal with executives. They don't want to deal with fucking know-it-alls. They want to. It's inspiring that artists. I could make a movie right now and actually get it in front of Netflix people probably and be like, "Do you want to buy this? I made it for whatever." and they would probably consider whether they wanted to buy it or not. I mean, it's a new time in the arts, and people are really free to create. That does also come with difficulties, you know, because like for music in particular, like I always feel really confused about it, because I mean, I guess it's always been the case that you just strive to make the best art that you can make, and it has its own natural way of competing with other art and kind of rising to a level that is justified by the art, the audience that it kind of brings about for itself. But you know, there's a lot. I guess there's a lot in question about how artists make money now. I'm this record I'm putting out in 2 weeks. I'm putting it out for like less than $400. It cost me to make this thing, to get it mastered and to distribute it. That was the only pieces I paid for, was mastering and distributing. It's really cool to have that, but it's also like kind of hard to bitch about not making money off of music. You know, I spent less than $400 on it. How can I be pissed off that I'm not making thousands of dollars off of the fucking, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, in all the formats, whether you're a writer and writing novels, whether you're a musician making records, whether you're a filmmaker, all the formats, all the channels, everything has changed. You know, even like visual artists. I mean, now you have NFTs. And you know, artists, you know, painters who are selling their stuff via Instagram. You know, I mean, all of the changes that have happened. And then you have, in the music business, folks who are like, you know what, I don't make records anymore. And that hurts my heart, because I love the experience of listening to an album in its totality. I think there's something very much a part of that, you know, that is important to me. That being said, some people are like, you know what, I'm going to release a single, one single each month for a year, and then at the end of it, I'll put it out as a complete collection. Yeah. Who's to say that that's a bad idea? You know, maybe that fits their production schedule and the way in which they create their art. Who am I to say that that's doesn't scratch my itch for having a whole album? You know,
right.
I agree with you. I think that the limits, the restraints have been kind of pulled off, not only in the format and the channel in which you put something out, but also the way in which you actually do it. I mean, shoot, $400 to create a record. Yeah. That's unheard of 25 years ago.
I know, man.
You know?
It's wild.
It's wild, you know, and the ability to put it out straight out to Bandcamp and have people see it immediately and publicize it on the internet. I can't argue with that. That's awesome. You know, does that mean that there's a lot of stuff out there? Yeah. Yep. You know, and figuring out a way to identify and discern, okay, this is the really good stuff, or maybe not. I mean, you know, the David Fricks of the world, or any of the great rock writers, or, you know, album reviewers that were at Rolling Stone or any other magazine, you know, since the advent of music magazines, were the gatekeepers, right? You know, and the guy who was at your local record store when you walked in, he was like, he's the guy who likes Los Lobos. I'm going to recommend this to him. You know, those folks were like the arbiters. You know, they were like, you like this, so you might like this. Or David Frick would say, hey, or, you know, David Frick would write a review, and you'd be like, well, that's David Frick. I should check out whatever he, you know, gave 4 stars to. Even those gatekeepers have kind of fallen away a little bit, you know? And so it's a really exciting time. I think in terms of the arts, at least I try and take an optimistic approach to it, or at least perspective on it. You know, at the same time, there's a lot of it out there. And so, you know, you kind of have to try and keep up a little bit. I try, you know, we were talking about it earlier. The thing that comforted me the most in terms of music that I was listening to during the pandemic was all this old music that I grew up listening to. And at some point in time, maybe 8 months ago, maybe even more, 9 months ago, I recognized, and I think it was when I saw the Spotify playlist, and I was like, gosh, I haven't really been listening to anything new. And I was like, that's kind of problematic, because I curate a room, or will hopefully be curating a room again one day soon. I need to be listening to new music again. And so I try and remind myself, for as much as I like to look back and listen to that stuff and be turned on to it, I gotta also push myself to listen to new things, even if I don't like it, you know, and just go, you know what? got to listen to it. Got to check it out. Someone told me about this. I got to go check it out, you know? And, you know, hopefully you surprise yourself. That's why I love like the playlists thing, you know? Like, I'm an album guy through and through. But in terms of musical discovery, I love going to websites like Aquarium Drunkard and getting their weekly playlist and listening to all of it and going, okay, there's some stuff on there that's old. There's a lot of stuff on there that's new. You know, I like listening to on Spotify the Release Radar, you know, playlist, because it's all the stuff that's coming out that week, and they pick one song from each album, and if I like it, then I go and check it out and check out the whole rest of the record.
Hell yeah.
But that's a lot of my musical discovery now, is like just listening to playlists, not only of publications, magazines, websites that are music related, but also just friends of mine who are like, hey, I created this playlist of stuff I've been listening to recently, and it's like, okay, well, if you're a credible person and I like what you do, either you're my friend or you're another musician or et cetera, like, I'm just going to listen to this and check it out. I've discovered so much stuff over the last couple of years that way.
Yeah.
You know, and got really into, for example, gospel music this past year. I think that was another thing that was like comforting.
No kidding.
You know, and it was like, okay. And I'd been fans of, and I booked the Blind Boys of Alabama at Sika. I've been a fan, you know, Mahalia Jackson, obviously Aretha coming from the gospel world. That stuff turns me on. But it was really from Phil Cook in Durham, doing this Sunday, essentially podcast or video cast of him spinning records, all gospel music. And it's called the Spiritual Helpline. And he did it for like 2 hours every Sunday during the pandemic. And one, he's amazing. I love his music. You know, I've known him for several years. We're friends. And he's like over the moon to share this kind of stuff, you know? And he's just got this huge smile on his face the whole time. And the camera's literally just pointing at him, like changing records. And he's just like, check this one out, you know? And so the energy and the vibe was like so positive and like love and like, oh, this is great. But also, he was like spinning all this incredible gospel music, of which I didn't know 90% of it probably. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is a whole genre that I thought I knew pretty well that I really don't know all that well.
Yeah.
And I've subsequently gotten into a lot of gospel music, and I'm like, man, this is great. You know?
Man, so many of the most significant musicians have come straight from gospel. It's such a magical form of music.
Mm-hmm.
That magic is a word that I started using since the pandemic.
Yeah,
Gospel is magic, man. It's and I'm not a religious person.
Neither am I.
But there's something to it. There's something deep in it, and I remember David Ford. Amidst the pandemic, I don't know what made him email me, but at some point he just emailed me. We were talking about something, and he sent me the Kirk Franklin Tiny Desk thing. And my God, I sat right over there. I watched it, and I was very emotional during I keep mentioning this, and don't mean to sound like a little bitch, but anyway.
No.
Kirk Franklin, he got to a point in it where he was just like dancing and having fun, and he was like, you've been hurting long enough. It's time for you to not hurt anymore. And this was in the middle of the pandemic, and I was just like, I just started crying my eyes out. Yeah. I was just like, what the fuck is wrong with me?
Yeah.
But it was just there's something so deeply enriching and deeply meaningful to like your soul in gospel music that is not really it's part of the whole religious tradition, you know, to be in touch with that part of yourself.
Yeah.
That's where it comes. That's obviously why we've had a relationship with that stuff for so long, because it affects us that way. It's really in there, and we just can't deny it.
I completely agree. I think it's like conviction, right? It's like the artists who are in the gospel genre, it's like there's a lot of conviction to their music. And then beyond that, any music that like has intent to it, you know, that like there is a purpose for whatever the artist, you know, had in their heart to create that music, whether it's they had a bad day or they have a relationship with a higher power. I can smell intent from a mile away. At least I feel like I can for the most part. And the stuff that has true intent, you know, like it rises to the top with me every single time.
What do you mean about when you
just
say
like
intent?
that there is like, hey, I'm going to go and do this. Like I think your songwriting and your art has great intent to it. That it's like you're getting a window into someone's soul, into someone's heart, into their mind. And when I hear an artist that I believe has intent with their artwork, and I would say largely that's musical, it's like a spidey sense for me almost. It triggers something where I'm like, yeah, they mean that. Like this is coming from a deep, deep place. And that's not to say that like vapid pop music is like horrible,
right?
Because there has a place. Is it the stuff that I continually revisit time and time again? Probably not.
Yeah.
But the stuff that just resonates with me, I can tell that someone, again, it's almost like the long form journalism thing. I can tell that someone really thought about it, and really spent time with it, and that there's a deep intention to it, and usually that's the stuff that like I listen to once, I recognize it in it, it resonates, and then I find myself revisiting it. And I feel like gospel music very much so, it like triggers that in me where I'm like, yep, okay. And I'm not like you, not a religious person at all, but it hits me, and that spiritual helpline with Phil Cook this past year, totally, like it was like every Sunday, it was like, hey, here's some more of this,
and it's, intent, I appreciate you lumping me into that category, by the way. I think all these different art forms, like when I think about what I do is like kind of, I'm a part of a tradition that kind of, in the same way that country sort of makes a time capsule out of like the ordinary parts of life or whatever, and makes them sort of like last, makes them sort of be permanent. I think stand-up comedy does that too, but it celebrates like the absurdity in life, where I think like the Americana or the country traditions of writing kind of celebrate the beautiful parts of life or something, or the things that could be considered mundane and everyday, but like are special because of that. And all these different things, rock celebrates our fucking intensity and blah, blah, blah. And gospel, just like religion does, all it does is try to celebrate goodness. All it does is try to celebrate optimism and like make a statement about how no matter what, everything can be summed up to goodness.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really permanently be, like cynical about that, because goodness is a good thing to look for.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of what you just said all like ties back to like truth. Like the best comedy, I mean, there's people who just tell great jokes, right? And that's awesome. But the comedians that really resonate with me are the ones who are like the truth seekers, the Bill Hickses of the world, where it's like, he's really hitting on something there. The Dave Chappelles of the world in some of his best work. Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, the guys who you were like, there's some jokes there, but there's some truth there.
Yeah.
And I think that all of the things that you were just talking about, the ones that do it the best were the ones who were trying to get as close to the truth as they possibly could.
Straight up.
And
100%.
Kind of cutting to the quick, as quick, as best they could. And they might not always hit it every time, but maybe that's what, is the thing that resonates with me in terms of intent, is like, man, like if someone is getting close to the truth with a song, I'm like, wow, like, It like I said, it's like a window into their heart, a window into their soul, and a window into their thought of what inspired them to write this song, And so, those are the ones that when I hear them, it's just like, I mean, I brought up Prime before. Like that last record is damn near a perfect record, and there's some songs on there where I'm just like, man, like Summer's End, that song is gorgeous. It's a beautiful song, and it's like he gets really close to the truth of the matter, and it's like, wow, I can't imagine even being a songwriter. That's got to be almost like a scary thing, like where you're like, wow, this thing's either coming together so quick or even if you've labored over it, but you finally arrived at that thing where you're like, holy shit, this is a really good song. Like, this is the best I could possibly do. And even if maybe you're not, or another songwriter isn't aware of how close to the truth you've gotten, either when you finish the song or even when you've performed it 10 years later, it'll resonate with other folks. And I just think those are the songs and the artists that do that and can do it on a consistent basis are the ones that I'm always like, oh yeah, I need to make sure I get that next record because that last one was really good.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's a hard territory to like be in. I think that is really honestly the root of what all culture is, which I think art fits under the umbrella of culture. And I think all of shared culture is about sort of mapping out our shared experiences as a species and trying to be like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And like, what is going on and what do we all agree with? And it's all testing our perspectives and do we all see it the same way? And I can't think of anything better for art to be based in than a pursuit of truth. And I'm going to probably mention the word ideology a lot on this podcast because I think that's where all these pursuits get really corrupted with different ideologies. Because like when you first brought up intent, I was like, I wanted to hear what you meant because I agree with everything you're saying. But then there's those people who have like an agenda in their art and their version of trying to pursue the truth is trying to indoctrinate someone with an ideology and trying to say, you know, I have, like a mad scientist, like I've written a song that I've discovered something that everyone needs to know, and I shall insert it into your subconscious.
I hear you.
And that's like, you know, the total opposite of, I think what it is that you've been describing about, you know, the type of art that you're drawn to.
Yeah, well, I think what you said is right. Shared experience. You create a piece of art, you put it out there, and then other people are like, yeah, they relate. They see something in it that connects with their life. And I think what that thing is the truth.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you could be, you know, an MC. You could be a jazz saxophonist doing just purely instrumental music. You could be a visual painter. You could be a novelist. But, you know, when I see that piece of art or I hear that piece of art and I connect with it, it's because there is that shared experience more often than not. And I think what I'm observing or what I'm acknowledging is, wow, that's the truth. You know, they got really close to the truth.
I love that. I think that's a good note to end on.
Perfect.
I think we're good to shut it down.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.